My dad kicked me out of high school because of a false rumor spread by my twin brother, and now they ask for my help after years of silence. I was 17 when my life turned upside down. My twin brother, Jake, had always been the golden child, charming, athletic, and effortlessly charismatic. I was quieter, more bookish, and content to stay in the shadows. Our relationship had its ups and downs, but nothing prepared me for the betrayal that would tear my family apart. It started with a rumor, one so ridiculous I initially laughed it off. Jake told my parents I had stolen money from their savings account. Not just a little, hundreds of dollars. I don't know what prompted him to do it, but the consequences were immediate and devastating. My parents didn't ask questions or give me a chance to explain. They simply assumed I was guilty. "You've disappointed us for the last time," my father said, his face cold and unfamiliar. My mother looked heartbroken but didn't say a word in my defense. That silence hurt more than any of the accusations. They gave me 24 hours to pack my things and leave. I was a teenager with nowhere to go. My best friend's family took me in, and I scraped by, juggling part-time jobs while finishing school. I cut off contact with my parents and Jake, their betrayal too deep to forgive. It wasn't easy, but over time, I built a life for myself. College, a career, a small but cozy apartment. I created a version of stability I never thought I'd have. Years passed. My parents never reached out, not even when I graduated or landed my first real job. Jake, unsurprisingly, stayed silent too. It was as though I had been erased from their lives. Then, last week, I got a call out of the blue. It was my mom. Her voice wavered as she told me my dad had been diagnosed with a serious illness. They needed financial help for his treatment, and Jake wasn't in a position to contribute. She didn't apologize for the past or acknowledge what they had done, just a simple plea for help. I was stunned. After all these years, they wanted me to swoop in and save the day. Part of me wanted to hang up, to let them deal with the mess they created. But another part of me felt the old ache of wanting my parents' approval, their love. I'm torn between my resentment and my lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be a path to reconciliation. But how do you forgive people who threw you away without a second thought? And even if I help them, how can I ever trust them again? The question hung heavy in my mind, an endless loop of anger, sadness, and doubt. How do you forgive people who turned their backs on you so completely? People who didn't care if you lived or died until they needed something. Even if I helped them, how could I ever trust them not to hurt me again? I thought back to that night when they kicked me out. The cold, hollow echo of the door slamming behind me. The sting of knowing I wasn't even worth a proper conversation. It wasn't just about the rumor Jake spread, it was about how easily they had discarded me. No questions. No faith. No love. But now? Now they needed me. Now, they remembered I existed. I wanted to scream at them, to remind them of everything they'd put me through. To ask why they didn't care enough to reach out all those years. Why I had to rebuild my life alone, while Jake, their precious golden child, probably didn't face so much as a slap on the wrist. But I also thought about the small part of me that had never stopped craving their love. The part that had imagined this moment 100 different ways, though none of those versions involved them asking for my money instead of my forgiveness. Could I find it in myself to help them? Would doing so make me stronger, or would it only reopen old wounds that I'd worked so hard to heal? Was this even about helping them, or was it about finally finding closure? I had to decide. Not just for them, but for me. Would this act of compassion liberate me, or would it chain me back to the pain I'd tried to leave behind? The weight of the decision sat heavily on my chest, pressing with every beat of my conflicted heart. Was helping them the right thing to do? Or was it just another way for them to take without ever giving anything back? For years, I had convinced myself I didn't need them. I had survived without their love, their support, their presence. But the scars of their rejection had never fully healed. Did I want to let them back into my life, even if it meant exposing myself to that same pain again? I sat with these questions for days, revisiting memories I'd tried to bury. The good ones, from before everything fell apart, and the bad ones, sharp and cold like broken glass. My friends urged me to think carefully, warning me against sacrificing my peace for people who had shown none to me. In the end, I realized something important: this decision wasn't about them. It wasn't about proving myself worthy or punishing them for their mistakes. It was about what I could live with. Could I walk away and carry the weight of knowing I had turned my back, even after everything they'd done? Or could I offer help, on my terms, and keep my boundaries firm? I picked up the phone and dialed. My mom answered on the first ring, her voice tentative, almost hopeful. "Hello." I took a deep breath. "I'll help you, but this doesn't mean we're okay. And it doesn't erase what happened. I'll send money for Dad's treatment, but that's all I can offer. Don't expect more." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd said too much or too little. Then she whispered, "Thank you. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't closure. But it was a step, however small, toward taking control of a relationship that had once left me powerless. As I hung up, I didn't feel lighter. Not yet. But I felt certain, this time, I was choosing for me. And that was enough for now. The days that followed were quiet, but not in the peaceful way I'd hoped. My mind kept circling back to that phone call, replaying every word. My mom's voice, so soft, so unfamiliar after all these years, lingered in my thoughts. "Thank you," she had said. But thank you wasn't an apology. It wasn't acknowledgement. It wasn't enough to erase the years of silence or the sting of betrayal. I told myself I had made the right choice. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for me, for the person I'd become despite everything, not because of them. I wanted to prove, if only to myself, that I could rise above their cruelty. That I wasn't defined by their abandonment. Still, doubts crept in like shadows at the edge of a fading light. What if helping them gave them the power to hurt me again? What if this was just the first ask of many, and I was opening the door to a flood of expectations I wasn't ready to meet? Or worse, what if they still didn't care, and this was all transactional to them? One evening, as I sat staring at the confirmation of the money transfer, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jake. I hadn't heard from him since the day he lit the match that burned my life to the ground. "Hey. Mom told me you're helping. I guess that's cool. Hope you're doing okay." I stared at the screen, anger bubbling to the surface. He hadn't even tried to explain, let alone apologize. After all these years, this was what he had to say? I didn't reply. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, I took a deep breath and put my phone down. This wasn't about him, just like it wasn't about my parents. This was about me, my choices, my boundaries, and my healing. I didn't have to forgive. I didn't have to forget. I didn't know them anything beyond what I had already given. As the days turned into weeks, I realized I wasn't waiting for their gratitude or validation anymore. I wasn't waiting for closure, because closure wasn't something they could give me. It was something I had to find for myself. And maybe, just maybe, choosing for me this time was the first step toward doing just that. As the weeks stretched on, life began to feel a little steadier, as if the storm inside me was finally settling. The phone stayed silent for the most part, aside from the occasional update from my mom about my dad's treatment. Her messages were short, factual, and devoid of any emotional depth. Part of me was relieved. Another part still ached for words that would never come. Jake, on the other hand, hadn't reached out again. That one feeble attempt at connection sat unanswered in my inbox, a reminder of how far apart we'd grown. Or maybe how far apart we'd always been. For years, I'd carried the weight of his betrayal, trying to understand how someone who shared my face, my childhood, my family, could do what he did. I realized now that I might never understand. And maybe I didn't need to. Slowly, I began to reclaim the parts of myself I'd buried under the hurt. I focused on work, reconnected with friends, and even started journaling again, a habit I hadn't touched since high school. Writing helped untangle the knot of emotions I'd been carrying for so long. Anger, grief, resentment, but also strength, resilience, and the tiniest flicker of hope for a future untainted by the past. One day, as I was flipping through old entries, I stumbled across a page I'd written years ago, not long after my parents had kicked me out. The words were messy, scrawled in a haze of heartbreak, but one line stood out. "I don't know who I'll become, but I hope there's someone who can smile again." I smiled as I read it. Not the forced, polite smile I'd worn so often, but a real one. A smile that came from knowing I'd made it through. I wasn't fully healed, I might never be, but I was stronger than I'd given myself credit for. Helping my parents hadn't fixed anything, but it had shown me that I could set boundaries and stand firm in my choices. I didn't have to let their needs consume me, nor did I have to let their rejection define me. Closure, I realized, wasn't a single moment or grand gesture. It was the quiet, ongoing process of choosing myself, again and again. And as I sat there, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The peace was fragile, like the first bloom of spring after a long, brutal winter. It wasn't loud or triumphant, it didn't come with fanfare or a sense of victory. Instead, it was quiet, a soft, steady hum in the background of my thoughts, reminding me that I had survived. More than that, I had grown. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their apologies, their validation, or their love to feel whole. What I had was enough, my own strength, my own choices, and the people in my life who had shown me what true care and loyalty looked like. That night, I wrote another journal entry. This time, the words came easier, lighter, like they'd been waiting for me to catch up to them. I'm still learning how to let go, of anger, of sadness, of the parts of me that still ache for something they can't give. But today, I realized I don't have to carry it all. It's okay to put some of it down. It's okay to move forward, even if I'm still a little unsure of the path. And it's okay to find peace, even if they never do. As I closed the journal and set it on my bedside table, I let out a long breath. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel so heavy. I didn't know what the future would bring, if my parents would ever offer the closure I once craved, or if Jake would ever find the courage to face the damage he'd done. But those answers didn't matter as much as they used to. I had finally learned that I could build a life without them. A life where I was enough, just as I was. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, for the first time in a long time, the ache in my chest felt a little less sharp, a little less consuming. It felt, finally, like I was free.